Alright, we have Fcx24 taking on the first obstacle. Pretty steep little ledge here at first. Climbs up it pretty nicely. You can see these stock shocks are pretty bouncy out of the box. They're not dampened or anything like that. A little bit of a hang up here. You can see the servo horn grabbing onto this sharp rock that's sticking out. Kind of have to work around it. Pretty composed, and the motor is pretty smooth for being stock and for those shocks being so bouncy. Got the Gladiator here up next. This thing's got a very large brushless motor. Very powerful, very smooth. Shocks are tuned so they're not bouncing around. This thing's really stable and smooth. Alright, working its way back. Took a different line here than I did with the FCX for some reason. So I think that rollover is probably my fault. Again, I'm still not taking the same line as I did before. Looks like found a way up though. The Gladiator's pretty long, so it can reach over a lot of things and kind of get away with being careless a lot of times. And it's just very stable, you can see. Next up we have the Mazdesigns cheat code chassis. This is the SCX24 standard wheelbase. Very custom rig here, built out of spare parts though. Has no problem. And this rig being a shorter wheelbase than the other so far, it gets up those sharp rocks a little easier because it has a better breakover angle. Alright, now this is the FS Tabs FC1 chassis. It's a fully 3D printed chassis. This is definitely my lightest truck, and it bounces around quite a bit. Definitely could use some more tuning. This is my first SCX24 and my first custom chassis that I stuck on one. This also has the least smooth motor out of all my rigs, with the brush motor and the V2 electronics taken out of my Gladiator. Alright, next line we have Fcx24 again. Lifts the wheel up pretty high. That's actually a pretty steep climb. The portal's being put to work right there. You can see they kind of climbed over that sharp rock. The rear is getting hung up though. This drags its way out though, no problem. You can see here, the suspension riding so high isn't really doing it any favors. And again, it's pretty bouncy, so the wrong bounce can cause it to flip over. We need to get these dampened as soon as possible. This truck has great clearances though. Really rare that rocks from below are causing it to be hung up or not get through the obstacle. Now this here seems to be a center of gravity problem. The body's pretty tall and heavy, and this driver rear is sinking into this hole, causing the whole front end of the truck to lift up. But with a little bit of patience and a steady hand, you can work around that. And Gladiator up again. The rear is hung up in that same spot that the Fcx24 was. Still able to crawl through just the same. And that gets pretty steep there, but the Gladiator doesn't seem to mind it. It's really poised and balanced. Definitely able to reach its front tires up and grab on there. And it also doesn't have the same problem with that the Fcx24 had with its tire dipping so low in the rear. Alright, the cheat code's back up. This is definitely my lowest CG rig here. Gets through everything nice and smooth there. Can't quite reach its way up like the Gladiator or the FCX could, since they're a longer wheelbase. And I think one of the issues that I had here, this is my first time going through this with a shorter wheelbase like this. So to give the cheat code some credit, I think I was trying to take the same line with a longer truck, and it's just not really possible. But all the same, it's important to see the difference in having a long wheelbase and short wheelbase and the strengths and weaknesses each way. Now we're coming at it at a different angle. I don't think the longer trucks would have been able to make this line because of the breakover angle. And this one finds the right spot and can crawl its way up finally. Probably more driver error, not fully paying attention to the limitations of each truck. Alright, the FC1 up against it now. So that's pretty similar wheelbase, or maybe even exactly the same as the cheat code chassis. But this body is definitely a lot higher and heavier. And this truck also weighs a lot less, so its center of gravity is nowhere near as good. You can see it kind of bounces around because of that, but seems to get through fine. If anything, it feels a little more toy-like because the throttle isn't as smooth due to the lower quality system that's in it, and also just the suspension isn't weight down the same. Alright, moving on to the next line. Fcx24 up again. You can see with the smooth hand, this thing still gets around pretty well, but you can see the center of gravity almost flipping it there, going downhill. Definitely a spot where tuning is needed. It's a pretty steep rock, so you gotta find the right spot. Looks like it gets up with a little bit of punch. This truck would do well to be lowered a little bit and have dampened suspension. It would be a huge improvement. Alright, Gladiator's up. This truck being so long is definitely my best steep climber. That length just gives it extra stability going up and down hills. Yeah, it doesn't even think about flipping going down that like the Fcx24 did. And with the long wheelbase, it can really just stick those front tires up and over obstacles, and it makes climbs just look so much easier. This is probably my only truck that can make that climb as a slow crawl there. Now the cheat code has very low center of gravity, and the suspension is nice and tuned, and it has good weight down low, so it's also a really capable climber. Just can't reach up and over like the Gladiator can. Very smooth and stable downhill though. You can see here, it just doesn't reach over that ledge like the Gladiator did. Gets up with some punch though, no problem. The FC1 chassis is up. You can see it likes to bounce around a little bit, but it still gets through it all. Almost flips like the Fcx24 did. The center of gravity on the Fcx24 and this truck are not quite as tuned as the Gladiator and the cheat code chassis. Now this one, due to its low weight and heavier body, it struggles a bit on this steep, slippery climb. It doesn't have the weight to get the traction on the tires, and the body also just tries to pull it back. You can see it rolled right there. It's hard to find the right angle because once you get to a point, your rear tires kind of sink into a little rut. So you have to punch it early, but then you might bounce and lose your line too. You can see it just really, it doesn't have enough weight in the front down low. Maybe this truck could benefit from some brass front links. Being a fully custom 3D printed chassis though, with 3D links, that'd be hard. But it makes it over. It finds its line and punches its way up. Definitely struggled more than any other on that line though. Now this line is pretty much all about belly clearance and breakover angle. You can see here you don't want your rear tires to square up to that rock or you're probably going to get hung on your linkage or on the belly. Again though, this truck has really good clearances and that rarely is an issue. You generally trade clearance for low center of gravity, and that's kind of the case with this truck right now, but you can kind of find a happy middle ground with most trucks, which I plan to do with this eventually, but this is stock other than wheels and tires for now. All the trucks are running the same wheels and tires if you didn't notice, just to keep them all kind of on a more fair playing ground, even though they're all very much different vehicles. Now the Gladiator is very capable, but belly clearance is definitely its weakness, being so long. You have to be a little more careful here. And again, what I said before, you have to keep the rear wheels going up this rock at different times or you're going to get hung up. So I'm trying to get that passenger rear to grab before I get my driver rear up. It's not having it though. It's not getting that grip on the front tires at the top of the rock. And there's a good example of when in doubt, throttle out. Sometimes wheel speed can just get you the momentum that you need to get over something, even if you're hung up a little bit. Going in this line backwards has yet to cause any problems. This spot looks a little precarious, but seems easy enough if you take the right angle. Oh, it's pretty sketch, but it makes it through. And obviously going down, you have gravity on your side and it's not a problem to get hung up there. Let's see how the cheat code does. It has a shorter wheelbase, so I don't think it'll have the same problems. Yeah, it makes it right up. No problem. We'll lose a wheel here. I'm not a fan of these axle extenders. I feel like you have a hard time getting your barrel nut snugged on there. Even with Loctite, sometimes it's just kind of a pain. I prefer an offset wheel rather than axle extenders. But we get it tightened up, and the cheat code has no problem. Way back, no problem either. Alright, the FC1 JLU coming in. Has no problem with the short wheelbase either, but you can tell the motor isn't quite as smooth. It's not as fun to drive like that, in my opinion, personal preference. But also sometimes a smooth motor can help you stay steady, and sometimes the jerkiness can unseat you, similar to having dampened shocks. Just those jerky movements sometimes can cause you to flip or overshoot a line or something like that. No problems though. We're on to our final set of lines here. Back with the Fcx24. I'm pretty shocked at how composed this vehicle is out of the box. Again, no modifications here other than the wheels and tires. You can see there, suspension needs tuning, but it still works its way down. And with good clearances and approach angle, this thing climbs up this pretty jagged, steep rock pretty easily. And if you're steady, you can kind of manage the poor center of gravity on this truck. A lot of these rocks are pretty dusty and have a slippery surface, but you can see some of the others are more jagged and have a lot of traction. So you kind of have to work around and sometimes use the grippy ones to grab on, and the slippery ones you have to be extra careful. Hung onto the axle a little bit there and pulled it off its line, but the Fcx24 made its final line. Now the Gladiator, going up this steep section. Struggling to find a little bit of grip here. Goes the higher route, and it does it just fine. You can really feel this motor's very strong. It's my strongest, biggest motor of any of my trucks, and it's a ton of fun to drive because of it. Oh, the Gladiator takes a bad descent there, but it speeds its way out. Being so long, you can really just let this truck sit in a spot and let the front wheels find their line and grab their grip. You have a lot of time to work with this truck. Makes it very capable. Working through the final set of lines. The Gladiator can really afford to be kind of careless there, just because the front wheels can just reach all the way across that rock basically. Struggling to find some grip here. And the Gladiator makes its final line. And the cheat code on its final set. Climbs up that first segment with no problem. This has the Micro Komodo in it, which is a very smooth system too. Not quite as big and powerful as the one I have in the Gladiator. But obviously you can see here, very smooth. Kind of showing off its stability here. This vehicle really impressed me today. it's just very poised, very stable. You can see there it can't do what the Gladiator can do, of course, different wheelbase. Can't reach over that rock and grab the other end. So it takes a higher line and makes it through. Really sucks down to the rocks, even going downhill. And it makes short work of its final line. Alright, now the FC1 on its final set. Crawls up nicely. It definitely doesn't stick as much. Kind of tumbles its way down, but it handles it fine. Does well on the uphill too. I'm definitely spoiled by smooth motors though. You can see I overshoot a lot of times with this because I'm not used to it. It's a lot more jerky than I'm used to. But it gets up and over. Just lining up for that final descent, I guess. And the FC1 makes it through its final set just fine.